care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow.
Welcome to the Oshow, Canada's current affairs show with strong opinions. And today's pod will be no exception. I am pissed. If you have heard, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has decided that he's going to spend upwards of $1 billion of our tax money to speed up beer sales in corner stores so that he can call an election with a nice shiny bauble to give to his voters, not unlike what he did last time when he took away having to renew license plate stickers. This is what Ford does. It's his playbook, but it's our money. It's our money. And this is not a time when the province of Ontario is doing well, despite what the Premier says in his cheesy gaslighting ads. What's happening here is we have ERs that are closing, where people don't even know if they have a heart attack, if they can even get service. This in 2024. In Ontario, we have unbelievable amounts of people experiencing homelessness, a lot of it because of Doug Ford's renovictions, where he took away rent controls when he got in. And that's leading people who could live in poverty, but live under a roof, to now be out on the street. There are food lines in this province. There are people who cannot get into long-term care. And when they're there, it's so deregulated that it's dangerous for them. There is a crisis across our healthcare system. We have lost nurses, and Doug Ford is paying nursing agencies 3 times more in the private sector to benefit his private sector pals. We have an education system that is in crisis as well. And all this Premier keeps doing is finding schemes to enrich his pals. It started with the Greenbelt, and there's news on that, which we will get to. New documents have come out. But his big Boozy scheme to get Ontario happy right before a quick election, to get ahead of the Greenbelt revelations and investigations and get ahead of Poilievre winning, is costing us money that should go to much better things. It's outrageous. Joining me here on the Oshow to talk about it is our scandal panel. And I'm so glad to have them because, wow, Canada, if Doug Ford can get away with this in Ontario, it's bad news for everyone, and we need to talk about how to stop it. He's also, of course, trying to destroy Ontario Place, cut down the trees, and create a mega spa where the money's going to go to some Austrian company in a secret deal. $600 million just on a parking garage for that thing. But we're going to talk about Ontario Place scandal on Friday with some of the people who are fighting back and got a big bunch of coverage in the New York Times this past weekend, which I think is impressive and sends a warning shot to Ford. So we'll talk about the Ontario Place scandal on Friday. But right now, let's invite into the conversation our scandal panel. Mark Cripps and Keith Leslie. Scandal panel. I booked you because of some other stuff that was going on a week ago. I can't even remember what Ford was up to then, because since we have found out a big Boozy scheme to get some baubles out there to the electorate before an early election he wants to call, a Boozy scheme that we know now by reporting could cost up to $1 billion to break contracts early to fit his political calendar. And also, of course, the Greenbelt scandal. We have new revelations in that. New investigations are being started. So I want to focus on those 2 topics, guys, because I've got Ontario Place people coming in to talk about their fight against Ford and their New York Times coverage this weekend. They're going to be on the next pod. So, right. You know, I think it was you, Mark, who sent me, you were down in the States, your daughter Molly was winning the gold medal championship in volleyball, but you still sent me this thing that said, that guy, like you, those were the words you put when you saw what Ford was up to. Like, you know, it was gobsmacking. It's hard to find words to describe the reaction. So why did you say that? What were you feeling? Where are you now? And we'll start with the booze thing before we get into the Greenbelt revelations.
Well, I guess I remain, I guess maybe I'm not surprised anymore at how Ford is using taxpayers' dollars to basically fund his political agenda, which has been to put ram booze into everyone's face. You know, I can't help but understand. Like, I don't know about you, but I mean, I drink. I don't feel inconvenienced about the options I have to buy alcohol. And the fact that, you know, that they're trying to sell this as convenience. You know, I live, you know, you and I live in a city right now where we have a homelessness crisis. There are people living in tents. There are bigger issues to tackle. And I sit here and I think to myself, what do they think? Like, if I go out and address the homelessness crisis, is that going to get me any votes? No. But if I can get beer in convenience stores, that's going to get me votes. And it just, to no end, it just angers me at the pettiness and the selfishness of this government. And everything they do is to benefit a buddy, to, you know, to benefit some kind of stakeholder, and to fundraise to make more money. And my first reaction was, they are calling an early election. There's no doubt about it anymore. They are gearing up. They are fundraising like hell, and they want to get out in front of the federal election. And so get ready, folks, because you're going to have your chance to render your judgment on this guy who is blowing through money like, you know, and the righteous indignation of this party in opposition to everything, the scandals, and I'm not defending the scandals of the previous Liberal government, but the righteous indignation that they put forth on every scandal, and yet they go ahead and they do it tenfold. And it just, like, we can talk about the Premier's office as well in the Greenbelt scandal and the amount of people working in the Premier's office, but I'll let Keith chip. I'm sure Keith has something he wants to say about this.
Yeah, well, just to answer your question, I do drink, of course, and I grew up in Montreal where we had booze in the corner stores at the Poilievre. It's nice, but is it worth $1 billion of my tax dollars that could be going to help the homeless crisis, that could be keeping ERs open on the weekend in small communities across this province, that could be topping up ODSB so people with disabilities, our most vulnerable Ontarians, evicted by Doug's policies where he took off rent controls? He has created a homeless crisis we've never seen the likes of before. He's created a hospital crisis we've never seen the likes of before. Let's talk education and autism funding for families. It's a disaster to live in Ford's, Ontario, if you're not one of his rich pals. And the idea that booze in corner stores is going to be enough for the electorate to give him another majority makes me want to weep. Makes me want to weep because it's so craven. So, to you, Keith.
Oh, thank you very much for that lead-in. I am sold. I was there 40 years ago when David Peterson promised to put beer and wine in the corner stores. So I think Ontarians are pretty patient on this file. And they would have been willing to wait one more year so that we wouldn't have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties and lower fees and all sorts of other things to the beer store to help them sell more beer to us at more locations. The logic is just befuddling. It absolutely is. And of course, we can mention David Peterson later when we talk about the election motivation perhaps going early behind this. But the booze deal itself, to understand perhaps people that aren't following as closely as we are, why we're so upset about the money here. The Premier started right off last Friday. He announced this. $225 million would be going to the beer store. Now, the Premier insisted, no, not to Labatt and Moles, not those big, multinational corporate owners. No, it's going to the workers. Then the Finance Minister, Peter Bethlenfalvy, he said, well, it's going to help the beer store, formerly Brewers Retail, keep open some unprofitable stores as we open all these other locations. Okay, we're going to help them stay open so they can sell more beer and stay profitable, because I'm sure they've never had an issue staying profitable selling beer to Canadians. So this is just ludicrous. Again, if we'd waited till next year, this could absolutely have just been done without paying these beer store any money. Now, it turns out on further digging, there's another $350 million in rebates that the beer store was paying to the LCBO that they will no longer pay. So now we're up to $600 million to get a one-year jump on beer and wine in gas stations and corner stores. $600 million. The Liberals, of course, come in with some more math, and they looked at lost revenues and foregone fees that the province didn't charge these 10,000 retail outlets that say the province of Alberta, which has private retail, they charge them a licensing fee to retail alcohol. So that gets it up to $1 billion. Now, there may be some political motivation behind there because every politician in opposition loves the phrase billion-dollar boondoggle. And so they've floated it up to that. But I'm joking here only a little bit. It's hundreds of millions of dollars at minimum. That's in the paperwork. The lost revenues and the other, we don't know. Again, hundreds of millions of dollars from an agency that turns over something like $2.2 billion a year to taxpayers, not counting the tax on the liquor.
Right.
So, major changes coming here, but why, again, is this money going from the LCBO basically to the beer store and to corporate taxpayers paying corporations to ensure their profits stay at a good high level? It's just astronomical. And again, is it really so that the premier can go a year early in an election and get out ahead of, couldn't they have campaigned, if they want to have an election next spring, couldn't they have campaigned on, and remember, come August and January or August and September, you're going to be able to have we're going to fulfill that promise. It just baffles the mind why they would think they could go now.
It only baffles the mind if you have a conscience, right? Like if you're somebody of good character and you're like, spend 250 million hard-earned tax dollars on a penalty to private sector, make more money, profit pals, or spend it on these crushing needs. Like I almost cried when I thought of how much that money could help in the affordable housing sector. I mean, this premier hasn't met his targets in affordable housing, but deeply affordable housing, supportive housing, transition, mental health supports, supports for people who struggle with addiction. There are so many things that would make such a difference to the people of Ontario right now. And to decide that your election prospects, that your power is more important than all of that, that getting ahead of Pierre Poilievre so that Ontario, isn't in that quandary of having two conservative governments provincially and federally. And so they wouldn't vote for Ford. I mean, to make that the calculus and to make the calculus, I got to get ahead of Bonnie Crombie in the opposition, because we want power at all costs. I mean, so it's not baffling and befuddling if you don't have a core, if you don't have a conscience, if you don't have a rudder, if your decision-making is all craven and self-interested, then this makes absolute strategic sense. As I said in one of my posts, and I'll go to you, Mark, on this, Ford doesn't know how to govern. I don't even think he cares about it, but he knows how to win. I mean, we had Kathleen Wynne on the pod, and she was talking about after he won the majority, he walked up to her, and instead of, any kind of gracious, comment to the person that he beat so badly, he was talking about the next election seat that he was going to take from the Liberals. I mean, this is how this guy, this premier, this is what he cares about. So, Mark, we can talk all day about all the other things that need money in Ontario other than freaking beer store. But when you see these stories coming out about more, pumping up the private sector, we just went through the scandals, the Staples scandal, not a couple of months ago, guys, where we found out that our money was going to an American company that was, a New York City hedge fund owned, and that they were laying off Canadian staff. What is the long-term goal for this premier propping up all his private sector pals? Is it, as I'm saying, Mark, simply power? Let's just give everybody as much of the trough as we can, so they'll give money to my election campaign and we'll stay in perpetual power? I mean, what's going on in Ontario?
Well, I think it's part of that. I mean, it's give me now, right? It's help me now, like fund me now. I'm helping you, fund me now. But you also set up a system that entrenches these long-term systems. So, once you undo something, like you create private healthcare, you open up convenience stores to booze. These are things that are going to last eternally. Unless no government's going to come in now, even if the Ford government loses, and pull booze out of the convenience stores, right? So they're setting up their buddies for long-term success. This is what, this is my experience with conservatives, is when they get in power, they make sure that their buddies are well taken care of for the long term. They come in, they change everything to make sure that their buddies, are all taken care of. And even if they lose, doesn't matter. Hey, I helped you out. But what got me more than anything is that, as somebody who has experienced the personal loss of my brother being killed by a drunk driver, in front of my eyes, watching my brother die at the hands of a drunk driver. And, we had last week find out that the Ford government was making deals with impaired drivers, cutting them a deal to get off of their charges, of facing the consequences for their actions. And then today we are making sure that booze can get in the hands of everybody. And look, we drink, I drink, I get it, but it is not really good for you. And while he's out there saying to Trudeau, don't you dare create these safe injection site cities, you know what? These people are addicted as well. And and with booze, you are putting a product out there that creates addiction, that creates problems in families, that creates dead people, from people who have access to alcohol, who would go into a liquor store or a beer store, and maybe that person is trained to spot somebody and not sell them alcohol when they're already impaired. Now we're going to have this shit everywhere. And I'm telling you, what is this our fucking priority in Ontario? Is more booze everywhere. This whole government got elected on a fucking cheap slogan of buck a beer. And here we are today, more booze for everybody. This is the biggest priority in our province. We are doomed if this gets the passing grade from the voters. I'm telling you, I don't know what to say. I feel sorry. I think the crises that we see around us are only going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, well, I mean, and alcoholism and the side effects lead to disease and lead to more pressure on our healthcare system. But then if you privatize the healthcare system and you're paying your buddies 3 times more with our tax dollars, it all turns into one big boozy scheme to enrich private sector pals, right?
Well,
it's a big boozy scheme to enrich his private sector pals. That's what Ford's agenda is for Ontario. Keith?
Well, look who's getting a discount. Look who's getting a 10% discount on booze that they're going to get from the LCBO. That would be Loblaw, Walmart, Costco, Metro, the big grocers, the big box stores. That's going to cost something like $150 million so that they can sell us, again, make booze more convenient for us to get at. Now, the chairman of the LCB, the CEO of the LCBO, Carmine Nigro, is a developer, longtime developer that Ford appointed chairman of this. And he has close business ties to Walmart, Costco. I mean, he was also, and you can
at the wedding, Keith, was he at the
wedding? Yeah, he was a wedding guest. And don't forget, for a while, you can bring it up on your next podcast, he was also chair of Ontario Place for a short time.
Yeah.
So the connections here are just, you can smell it coming up. I mean, it's just wafting up. Again, to this point we keep railing on about the big guys getting so enriched by this government that claims to be for the little guy. And yet the little guy is standing outside the hospital or driving to another one because his emergency department is closed, or his mother's in the hallway for the last 3 days hoping to get a bed along with 30 other people. Have you seen the pictures of the beds side by side in the hallways? It's just stunning. So the fact, I know even hundreds of millions of dollars of healthcare can disappear without a huge impact, but it still would have made a major difference, especially if it was targeted towards emergency departments or specialist doctors for fill-in for, all these hospitals that are so short-staffed. There's a way this money could have been targeted for a lot more than a 1-year jump on a beer and wine and corner store and gas station promise that we've been waiting 39 years for. Why not wait for the 40th? It's actually a nice anniversary. They could have mocked the Liberals to death with this.
Yeah.
The Liberals have been promising this since they never even mentioned that. Of course, they don't want to mention David Peterson, as I said, because, of course, he used his calculus in 1990. He saw a big recession coming. He was right about that and thought, well, in my 3rd year, I'm going to seek another mandate here. And the Ontario voters were so pissed off at that just blatant politics, they elected a new Democratic government and regretted it ever since, and will never do that again. They also handed Peterson his ass and kicked him out of his own seat that night, simply because they liked him. He was a popular premier, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And if giving him that majority, we probably would have got the beer and wine in the corner store maybe 30 years ago. But no, just because he went that year early, people just went, that just stinks. And they kicked his ass out.
I wish, I mean, I remember moving to Ontario that year, right after the election is when I arrived. And all I heard was Bob Rae's premier from everyone. Like it was like a zombie apocalypse. People were,
Even Bob Ray said that. I agree. He was shocked as anyone else.
yeah. So I don't, I don't want to be completely dystopic here, guys, but I don't know that Doug Ford's base, the people, and it's not a big base. What's it, like 19% or something? Because nobody voted in the last election. So his majority of the people who voted is not a majority of Ontarians. It's of people who voted. And they are motivated, apparently, to vote for cheap beer. That's a thing. So he knows. He's done the calculus on this. He knows. And I talked about a moment ago, and I want to go back to you on this, Keith. I talked a moment ago about some of the calculus for him in calling an early election, get ahead of the Poilievre Conservative victory federally, get ahead of Bonnie Crombie. And if you listen to the ads on Bonnie that they're doing to define her, they are effective. And I don't know why she's not fighting back harder everywhere he is, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere. But I also think he's trying to get ahead of these Greenbelt investigations. And I know the RCMP investigation, we've heard nothing, crickets. Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals just asked, as has Merit, for updates on all this. I don't have big faith that the RCMP is going to do a damn thing about Doug Ford. We're going to have to beat him at the polls. But there are other investigations now, are there not, Keith, that have been launched because of the big finding this past weekend that his chief of staff was using a private Gmail account to do political business, and that, they were using code words. I mean, nothing says a cover up, guys, like coming up with a code word that won't be searched in a Freedom of Information request or whatever. I mean, it's so shamelessly scandalous. So Keith, do you think he's also trying to outrun this drip, drip, drip of the Greenbelt scandal?
Absolutely. It's not, despite his flip-flop and taking it back and apologizing, it's still, as you say, it's coming and coming. There's more and more and more. And we're finding out, despite the premier's denials, that his office had anything to do with the lands that were selected for the removal from the Greenbelt and went from being worth tens of millions of dollars to $8.3 billion overnight. There's now seeing that there was all sorts of emails going from the premier's office to developers. There's several different cases. The New Democrats went to the privacy commissioner and said, something wrong here. You need to look into it. The privacy commissioner came back and said, I've got 19 very similar complaints about Greenbelt communications, emails, this sort of thing. I'm going to open a special investigation, and I will issue a special report. Now, if we go back to 2013, a special report from the privacy commissioner, who cares? Well, the one in 2013 that was into the Liberal government's gas plant scandal of 2011 led to a police investigation that led to criminal charges against David Livingston, the chief of staff to Dalton McGuinty. And he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs and went to jail for 35 days, sentenced to 4 months, served 35 days. This was a man in his 60s, complete business integrity. I mean, it's just wiping government emails off the hard drive on a Sunday afternoon sent him to jail because he was trying to avoid Freedom of Information request to find out what the government emails were going back and forth about the gas plant scandal, where the Liberals relocated 2 gas plants before the 2011 election to save seats in Oakville and Mississauga, and cost $1 billion, another $1 billion boondoggle to do so. So here we are right back again. It's just ludicrous.
And the gross thing is that we have Ford standing up on video talking about, that stuff, right? About the ending corruption or ending, the blah, 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 blah. The very thing that he rightly could criticize about Kathleen Wynne and it was, the scandal predated Kathleen. It was Dalton, but she was part of his cabinet, I believe, at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so she still wears some of that, and he had every right to go after it. I was pissed off about the $1 billion boondoggle too. And when I saw Bonnie Crombie come out the other day, the head of the Liberal Party in Ontario, and say, this is a $1 billion boondoggle, I'm like, maybe you don't want to use that exact language, because that back what happened. And Margaret Skimba, who's a friend of the pod here, she's a columnist of the Hamilton Spectator, she said, call it a boozdoggle if you're going to use the alliteration, right? But the point being that this absolutely cynical grab for seats in an election and using our money is disgusting, and it's why people hate politicians. But when I look at what happened with Wynne, and I'm not partisan, I didn't vote Liberal in the last election. When I look at what happened with Wynne, and I say to myself, how many of those have we seen with Ford already? I mean,
Yeah.
we'll talk Ontario Place on Friday with the guys from Ontario Place, but I mean, 600 million for a parking garage that nobody asked for a spa nobody wants, the Staples, like helping retrofit Staples stores. Now we've got the beer store. I mean, it's almost at the level of being a sick joke. And I know people watching this who are Ford fans are loving that, they're owning the libs or whatever. But, calling out injustice is calling out corruption is not a partisan activity. It's
Right.
the activity of every good citizen in a democracy to say, you know what, this stinks. I don't care if you're NDP, Liberal, or Conservative or Green. It's our fucking money, right?
Well, and government by Gmail is how they hide what they're doing with our money. And irony of ironies, they were caught doing this, and after the reports last year from the Auditor General into the Greenbelt scandal, they were all called in. The chiefs of staff were all called in and told, look, we have to keep proper records. You can't use the Gmail. Blah, blah, blah. So the Premier's chief of staff, this one that we're talking about now, has just been involved in lots of his emails were obtained by Global News doing government business. He sent out a note to the other chiefs of staff who all report to him in the different ministries that report to the Premier's chiefs of staff on a Gmail account to their Gmail accounts, saying, don't, make sure we use government. And then he, of course, he wrote a letter to the Integrity Commissioner saying, we would never conduct government business on Gmail accounts. So what do you do? And as you mentioned, there's passwords G for Greenbelt and all these sorts to avoid detection, to avoid FOI scrutiny.
SP for
There's nothing
special
like
projects or some bullshit.
There's nothing like government doing everything in private and trying to hide it, deliberately trying to hide it. I mean, we have no details about the 95-year lease to Therme on the Toronto waterfront for Ontario Place. We still have really basically no details about the sale of Ontario of the 407. By the previous Conservative government. I mean, these things are done in secret, and the taxpayers lose or spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars every time. To what benefit? To benefit, it seems, of either a government's political aims or their big business friends.
So I'm going to end the show on this, guys, because obviously I'm going to have you back soon, because, I mean, we're back into the green belts unraveling for Ford. And I mean, this is just going to keep getting worse. You can feel it. You can smell it. But I just want to end this with you. I've been hearing from Oshow viewers from across the country, from Alberta, from Quebec. I've been talking to people, and they are wondering what the hell is wrong with Ontario. Like, just a little rich because Alberta's got some problems. But I mean, the idea that we would put up with this, like, I couldn't think of another premier across the country. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I remember Ralph Klein's shenanigans, and I remember what was going on with, in Quebec when I grew up there. But I can't remember another premier being just so brazen with and so wasteful with the tax dollars and so ready to dismantle things like healthcare and education and to privatize and to profit their pals. I think Ford is the most scandalous premier, certainly in my lifetime. So I just want to end with you on, do you agree with that? Can you think of one who's been worse? And also, do you think that the people of Ontario will wake up before this early election? And we'll wrap it there, Mark.
Laura, I've recently come to the conclusion that we need that I think I'm prepared for some real awful things to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. I think voters in general are leaning right, and they're not really the Trudeau factor has really, unfortunately, impacted at the provincial level as well. Liberals, the Liberal brand, and the left brand, and I think voters. I think voters unfortunately need to feel the pain personally before they realize what they gave away, what they had, and I've kind of, I know this sounds cynical, but I've really come to the conclusion that the sooner it happens, the better, because we need to get back, and a lot of people are going to suffer. We are going to see an incredible amount of suffering over the next 10 years as this right-wing populist authoritarian style of governments run their way through the provinces and federally. And all I got to say is good luck with that. And a lot of people are going to get rich, and the disparity between the rich and the poor and the people who are connected is going to become even stronger, and it's going to be a hard nut to break. And it's going to take an uprising, and I'm not seeing it yet. And I'll just leave this: if Ford is reelected, the Greenbelt is gone, because I'm telling you right now, if he gets another mandate after what just happened, and unless the RCMP come out and charge a bunch of people and a bunch of people go to jail, I fear that that will be his the free pass he needs to say, you know what? I didn't lose an election even after that Greenbelt scandal. Let's go. Get the bulldozers ready.
Yeah, he'll be impervious to popular uprising or protest. He'll be like, yeah, well, I survived that thing. I correct myself. I think Mike Harris's policies were as deleterious as Ford's. It's just that Mike Harris did it in like a way that didn't seem so shameful and brazen, although, still profiting that group. I just want to bring up what Biden said in his Memorial Day speech. He actually said, in the fight against autocracy, it's about the greed of the few over the rights of the many. Right. And I really want people to hear that. The greed of the few over the rights of the many feels like what we're seeing happen in Ontario, feels like what we're hearing at the federal level, is what we're seeing in the US with MAGA, is what we're seeing with Russia and a bunch of other places that are pushing authoritarian. And we had Charlie Angus on the pod, very powerful about the politics of intimidation and death threats against MPs. I encourage everyone to watch that episode as well. And let me just end with you, Keith, our veteran journalist here. Can you think of a worse premier? And also, are you as dystopic as Mark? Or do you think that, people might be feeling enough of those pain points already in Ontario?
I agree with a lot of what Mark said, but I'm a little more hopeful in that, I'm hopeful Ford won't go early, that he'll realize there's a lot of risk in going early, a heck of a lot of risk, especially with this privacy commissioner's report perhaps coming, perhaps the Mounties reporting at any time. I mean, I'm also hopeful, though, that if he doesn't, if he hangs in there and doesn't go early, that Justin Trudeau will go for a walk on the beach or whatever it takes and decide that, there should be a Liberal leadership race and that someone will, I don't know whether it's a Mark Carney or LeBlanc or someone else coming in, that could perhaps lead the Liberals, at least to present a serious challenge to Poilievre, to prevent him from getting a majority government, perhaps. But I also think, this traditional thing about Ontario always wanting different governments in Queen's Park and Parliament Hill. I think Poilievre is about as different from the Conservative Party of Canada, from the Progressive Conservatives of Ontario and the pragmatic Ford Nation. I think he'd have no trouble campaigning against them. Just as he can campaign against the federal Liberals. And when you're a government in Ontario, that's your target that you campaign against. You ignore the other guys and you campaign against the federal government for the most part. I don't think Doug Ford would have any trouble campaigning against Poilievre, and I think fairly successfully. I still think there is that right-wing push, especially at the provincial level. But I think Canadians as a whole are still really, really skeptical about Poilievre, his motivations, his record, the fact he's a career, all of these things. And so I think there's going to be a lot of voting booth second guessing, especially if Mr. Trudeau takes the message, reads the writing on the wall, and lets the Liberals have a leadership race and a new leader take them into that next election.
I'm all for it. His father took a walk in the winter woods. He can take a surf on the summer surf. I don't care. But I think you got to do what's good for the country over what's good for your own legacy sometimes. But let me just wrap up the show here, guys, because I want to stay true to our time and I want to have you back very, very soon. The idea that Ford is already, according to, I think the Toronto Star had the scoop, that Ford doesn't want to be, he's worried about a Conservative Poilievre government cutting things in Ontario, so he doesn't even, Brittle Star, also a great pod we had recently, just put out a tweet about, not even Ford wants Poilievre. So I think you made your point well on that one, Keith. Listen, guys, thanks for being here. And for all of you listening to the pod across Canada, of course, we're national now. You can find us in all the great places you find your podcasts, and also watch it on YouTube if you want to see the facial stuff. But I think we are mostly a clip show. Our clips are getting tens of thousands of views. We really appreciate you guys being here to help bring some reason and strong opinion and analysis to current affairs in our country and to Ontario, which of course is a big, powerful province within that country of Canada. Thanks so much, guys. And we'll have you on again very, very soon. Mark Cripps, Keith Leslie, Scandal Panel. Take care, guys.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow.
Your merch bin.